see a lot more older men who are coming into the area for the purpose of picking up these kids.
When he was 14 years old, he would bring them down to the city and just started selling them on the streets so that he could feed his drug habit.
Their drug addiction did lead them to prostitution. Others started using drugs after they were in prostitution, a way of dealing with the consequences. The true image of God that he has, he's loving, he's caring, and has compassion, that even in the middle of their worst nightmare, their worst client, or the abuse, he was there to keep them.
Welcome to Pure Passion. My name is Jonathan Daugherty, and I'm your host for today's program. Have you ever seen a Christian TV program about male prostitution? Me neither. Today we're going to take a rare glimpse into a world that most people would like to pretend doesn't exist. It's a world of great sadness, murder, suicide, pornography, drug addiction, and brutality. It's a world populated by young men and boys who are lost and alone in the world. Most have been sexually abused or physically abused in other ways. Many have been groomed since childhood by pedophiles who trade them around to their friends like baseball cards. None of them can imagine that there is a God who could love them. To our knowledge, Emmaus Ministries in Chicago is the only Christian ministry in the U.S. that helps rescue and rehabilitate these young men. Let's see how they do it.
I was born in Oak Park, Illinois. I was born to a middle-class family.
My father was an alcoholic.
I was shy. I never felt like I fit in with other kids.
My father beat me.
I had difficulty in school. I had a learning disability. So I always felt that, I was believing these lies that, you're slow, you mess up.
I was raped. I was abused by family members.
When I got to my first drink at 13, it changed all that for me. It made me everything that I wanted to be.
My mother started doing drugs.
I was all automatically funny. I was like, everybody wanted me around.
It got to the point that dope dealers was moving in. They was living there. They was inside our house, sleeping in the bed I'm sleeping in.
By the time that I was 19 years old, I was shooting hard drugs. I was living as a transsexual.
We was water to the state. We took it from my mother.
The hole was inside of me, and I was trying to fix it with all these outward things.
They split me and my brothers up, and my brothers was the only somebody that I ever had.
I've come so far from that kid in Oak Park that I can no longer go home.
I rebelled against society, walking the streets, instant gratification. I was just out there in my madness.
I went to the penitentiary 3 times. And after the 3rd time of being there 7 years, I had a friend who had told me about Emmaus.
We start with outreach. That's our fundamental piece. With those 7 nights a week, we have 2 teams out, usually male and female, walking the streets. And then we hope to engage guys and to invite them down to our drop-in center, which is open 6 days a week. And there we have an opportunity to go deeper into their lives and to help them look at various areas of their lives, that kind of thing.
Nobody wakes up and say, I want to be a prostitute. But homelessness is something because of the economic downturn in our country, and so people will get turned on to it, or somebody will approach them, and they'll say, I'm only going to do it this one time, enough to get a place for the night, or to get enough money where I can have the transportation to get to a job. Some of it is, with our men, is having mental illness and schizophrenic, bipolar, dissociative disorders. And so when you're not able to get your medication, or you're hearing voices and you want to self-medicate, for a lot of men, some of it is their drug addiction did lead them to prostitution. Others started using drugs after they were in prostitution, of a way of dealing with the consequences, of a way of being able to cope with hopping in and out of cars with strange men, and the things that they were forced to do that were against their nature as well.
If you think about the guys as fundamentally distant from almost anybody in their life, they have very few relationships, certainly any relationships of quality, and there's very little trust in their life. And so it may take a little time, but the guys are lonely. They're sad and lonely, and that somebody takes an interest in them. And our staff, our volunteers are very careful and gentle in the way they approach it. It's not an in-your-face style at all. It's a presence. Guys are walking around, our volunteers on outreach, they're patient. They're walking around, they're praying, they're seeing guys, they're observing. And so a lot of the men who are hustling have seen them over a period of time, and they become increasingly aware of or maybe more comfortable with their presence. And then the first thing is, can I buy you a cup of coffee?
We find that quite a few of the men who come to Emmaus are heterosexual in orientation. There are a few that identify as gay, but for a lot of our men, their fathers, their girlfriends or wives, even know that they're involved in prostitution. It's a way that they support their family.
These guys come to us extremely broken. They're physically, sexually, they've been abused growing up. A huge percentage of our guys share that as part of their story. It's amazing. One guy, he called a couple years ago. He said to me, can you call my dad and ask him to send me $20? And he was in a program and he wanted his dad to send him a little money. I said, okay. I was there early and I answered the phone, and so I did. I called his dad and he said, oh, I love hearing from my children. Sure, I'll send it to him. After I hung up the phone, I talked with another one of our staff members, and she said, oh, that's interesting. She said, it's his dad who's the one who sold him into prostitution. When he was 14 years old, he would bring him down to the city and just started selling him on the streets so that he could feed his drug habit. And that's maybe a little bit extreme for our guys, but that story is repeated in other ways. But that gives you a glimpse of the brokenness that our guys have, that particularly the sexual and physical abuse that most of them endure growing up. But then there's also the brokenness as far as most of our guys are unemployed, most of them are homeless, a high percentage of them, or a significant percentage of them are mentally ill, 25-30% or so are HIV positive. So it's guys who are they're kind of a mess. They're very broken. They're not people who've just made a few wrong things and you just tidy things up here and there, and then they're gonna be good for life. They're gonna get their apartment and get married and their job and move to the suburbs. It's guys who are so broken, all the basic elements of life that most of us take for granted. They weren't there for them, and they're not just going to reappear once we love them or to speak Christ into their lives. It's going to be a long, long journey.
What happens when you get to the point where you're selling yourself on the streets is all of the people and voices that are speaking into your life are negative. You know, these are men who are trapped. They are trapped emotionally, sexually, psychologically, spiritually.
We have men that have gone through things that sometimes our minds can't even imagine that could happen to a 3-year-old child, or living in 32, 22 various foster homes, and yet to survive that and come out and come here. And so it's almost like to them it's normal to feel unloved.
We are bondage breakers as the Church of Christ, and it's our job to be light in the darkness. And there's a lot of darkness out there, and there's a lot of places where people of light need to be.
I see from the Gospels that there's a huge need to be connected to people who are broken, people who are in poverty. We are a ministry of mercy and compassion with a heart for, seeking for transformation of the guys' lives. But realizing most of our guys don't have anybody who's ever going to be crying like that for them. That's not a part of their life. No one really poured that much into them, and they were not that much of a treasure to anybody. And that's very sad, and that's something most of us take for granted, or many of us do, of just loving parents, people who care for us so much. And our guys don't have that. And what we try to be as a family, we try to love these guys. We're not a social service agency, but we're not a church. We're sort of this blend. We're a ministry, and we journey with them. We love them. We care for them. We serve them. We speak into their lives. And we can't meet all their needs. We don't pretend that we can. But we are a family, and we love the guys, and that's what we That's what we bring to them, relationship. That's what we do best.
Most of our men are street hustlers, which means they're standing on street corners, be it in Boys Town, or which is a gay part of town, or other areas where prostitution takes place. Sometimes they are groomed, but not in a sense that they have a sugar daddy who takes them. A lot of it's through sexual abuse, and so they get identified. I call it them predator spirits, who see their loneliness, see their desperation, and so they may start being nice to them and buying them clothes or toys and that sort of thing. And then they feel obligated to either service the person who's provided that or including their friends as well. One young man tells the story that he grew up in an alcoholic home with parents and grandparents, and his salvation, he thought, came from a man across the street who was paying him some attention and who started just the ways that I mentioned, buying him clothes, playing baseball with him, catch, but eventually it led to sexual abuse that went on for a number of years. But he still felt more comfortable, he still felt a refuge at that man's house than he did at the home with the physical abuse, the verbal abuse, the spiritual abuse that was going at home. So it was the lesser of two evils for him.
Most of the guys who are out in the streets, even today, you could term them as maybe over-evangelized, as in many of the programs that are operating in the city, particularly shelters and food kitchens, soup kitchens, that kind of thing. They're Christian-based, they're faith-based, and so a lot of them present the gospel, and so our guys hear that a lot, and they've become, many of them are fairly deadened to it, or a lot of them grew up in the church, and yet there's a clear disconnect between their lifestyle, their behavior, and what the gospel is about. And so you know that you have to go a different route. You can't be very simplistic in the way you reach out to them. You have to love them, the classic line about earning the right to be heard. You have to be out there in the winter, this last winter, 2.5 feet of snow, freezing cold. We had people who were out there walking the streets. When you're out there all winter long, engaging guys, you earn respect.
What we're seeing is that the minors are out on the street, and so our ministry, to come to our drop-in center, you have to be 18 or older, but our outreach coordinator, Doug, he deals with kids a lot younger. And unfortunately, we're seeing as, again, more homeless youth. We see a lot more older men who are coming into the area for the purpose of picking up these kids. They're harder to reach than some of our older guys because, to a large degree, none of them have ever been churched. No one has ever introduced them or taught to them about God. And so when you start talking to them about God, sometimes they're very angry. One young man told us, "Where was God when I was hungry? He didn't float a cheeseburger or something down from heaven to feed me, so why should I believe in him? Why should I take this message that you're trying to tell us now?" And they tend to be a closer-knit community hanging in what they call family groups. And so it could be made up of anywhere from 5 individuals or more, gay, lesbian, or straight young people who sort of have each other's backs, who will go out, prostitute, panhandle, steal to support, come back together at night to sleep together because of safety in numbers. And it could be an abandoned house, it could be in a shelter, on the street under the viaduct. So that's what we see in the younger people. Because they are minors, if they go back and some of them are runaways, and not just coming from other sides of the city to the north side where we're located, that it's possible for them to get sent back home. So they could go back into the home where the abuse is coming from. They're in foster care. They could end up back in another foster home situation, which is what they ran away from in the first place. So a lot of times they don't want the services that you have to offer. They just want you to provide them with a meal. The places where the prostitution takes place, mostly it's a night thing, but also, unfortunately, especially along the lakefront, there are men who go during the day, who come in the city either before work, on their lunch break, after work, who are looking for activity. So the young men know that they can go to the park. And then there's a number of bathhouses that have open or under the guise of health clubs, and so they're open 24/7, and so a member can take you in and you can stay there out of the elements, out of the weather, and be in those places as long as you're serving and seeing the men who come to those establishments. A guy may have a apartment, he may be living in a program, be it a recovery home, a home for men who have HIV, and they will go out and prostitute because that's the way they've learned to communicate intimately with someone. We actually had one young man who was out on the strip, and the other prostitutes were about to jump on him because he was hopping in and out of cars for free. He just wanted the attention. He just wanted, as he later told me, someone to hold him, to have conversation with him. That's the way he learned to communicate, was sexually. Even in the ministry center, we've had young men who will offer themselves to you. And we have to, in such a way of not to make them feel bad, say, I understand what you're trying to say. That we are giving you a service, we're showing you love and compassion, this is what you are trying to convey to us, but that's not why God has put us in your life right now. That's a hard concept for them to learn at first, again, because they're eventually in a relationship, even when somebody was being nice to them, there was something expected from them later on sexually. The spiritual connection, as we introduce them to God, is something a little bit harder for them to grasp, but when they grasp it, they generally eat it up in the sense that they want to learn more. And so the whole concept of soul ties, when we talked about God's initial design for sexuality between a man and a woman and how you imprint on each other physically, spiritually, and emotionally, even with the sense, when I teach on that, how you become attracted. And everybody that you sleep with, you leave a part of yourself. We talk about how you go back and you break that soul tie. You get it off of your mind and off your spirit, because many times they're linked to that person and they don't understand why, or they're linked to that abuse because that abuse brought some pleasure in the sense that it brought you the attention, it gave you money, the things that you needed, the basic necessity out of life, food and shelter. And so in that healing process, as we work through that, they start to understand what are boundaries, what are healthy relationships, what are the things to look for that I just can't trust everybody that I come across on the street. There's one teaching that we do, and it's talk about cleaning your house, and figuratively and emotionally and spiritually, that you need to go through in anything that a former lover, customer, or client gave you, you need to get rid of because it'll have attachment to it. You may not look at it in the sense of love, but you have that emotional tie. So I may come through and look at that teddy bear on the couch, and I may pass it 5 times. That 6th time, it gives me a response, be it anger or I'm feeling love or emotion that I shouldn't feel, that connection for that person. So we talked about getting rid of those things, those items, clothing, even jewelry, and not giving it or passing it on to somebody, actually destroying it, throwing it in the trash so you don't pass that spiritual element on to someone else. And then emotionally and mentally, how do you get rid of that mental picture that's in your head? What's that healing process? And so through prayer and working them through that, turning it over to God. The issue of repentance it's a hard one for the men because you have to get them to see God perhaps in a totally different light. With some of the guys, even praying and talking about Heavenly Father, gets a reaction from them because they may equate that with their earthly father or stepfather or foster father, someone who in authority has abused them, even the police. Our men are at the bottom of all society, the homeless society, the gay community, all of the places in which they enact. And so it becomes first talking about God wants more for you than what the current place that you're in. It's talking about God's design for them, that they were never designed to be someone's sexual toys. God wants more for them than be as someone's beck and call for sexual pleasure. As they started to understand that and you work on the true image of God that he's loving, he's caring, and has compassion, that even in the middle of their worst nightmare, their worst client, or the abuse, he was there to keep them. And you point out in small ways that he was there for that. As they get their relationship with God, then they start having that godly sorrow. You know, God, I'm sorry for what I'm continuing to do, the activity that I'm currently in. And even in that, God still forgives you. He still has compassion for us, and he wants you to come out. One of the great things about Emmaus is that we have godly women who work in our ministry. One of the greatest healing things is because they perhaps also didn't have good relationships with mother, a grandmother. These women have abused them sexually and emotionally as well. The relationships that they've had on the streets for those men who don't identify as gay, who are heterosexual, a lot of it is drug-induced relationships. We're getting high together, we may have prostituted together. And so they have godly women in the ministry center who can give them that motherly hug, who can, if they're a similar age, to could be that sister to show them what godly women and true healthy relationships can be. And even for the men who may identify as homosexual, when women are around, you see the manhood in them come out, where they're pulling chairs, opening doors. If one of the other guys, they feel is disrespectful or raise his voice, hey man, that's a lady over there. You know, you're not on the street speaking to one of those crack women or whatever. This is a woman of God. You need to address her differently. And so we see that element come out as well. Several times a week, on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, we do life skill training. Many of the men, and we ask them once a quarter, what are some classes that you would like for us to teach in? And if we don't have the expertise within the ministry center, we'll get speakers and somebody else to come in and address the issues. And so things that we take for granted, the men some of them have never had bank accounts. And so we've watched guys who get old enough or who are able to qualify for SSI, get a check, go open up a bank account, and then get into big trouble very soon with their bank card, because they assume that if I go to the ATM, that as long as I have money, they'll keep giving it to me. So the whole idea of balancing it, being overdrawn, and so we work on those issues with them. Maintain an apartment. If I have been homeless the majority of my life, or with some of our young men have never stayed in a stable home, when you get a place, how do I prepare a meal? How do I go even shopping for myself? What are the healthy things versus buying just a bunch of junk stack or some junk food or something for me to fill myself up with? How do I maintain and wash clothes properly, keep the apartment clean? How do I set healthy boundaries of who should come and who shouldn't come over to my house? And so we work on those type of things, as well as also doing recovery groups, both spiritual recovery and AA or NA type of meeting as well. And then we have groups where we ask them, what do you guys want to talk about? And so it's sort of an open topic, and then we'll address it. Always spiritually based, always closing those groups out in prayer as well. We also have a prison component to our ministry, and so we go to court with the men. We also talk to their public defenders, and so we try to get them into anger management classes and that sort of thing, and work with them while they're in prison and before they get out, to have a plan when they get out, have housing or a program to go to once they're released from prison.
A lot of people say success is a man coming from the street and his life totally changing. But success to me, to Lynette, is seeing a man walk in here broken and feeling like he's not loved, and see his shoulders kind of straighten up and his eyes try to kind of brighten up, because he know when he walks through these doors, he's loved.
Maybe you don't know anyone who's a male prostitute. The odds are extremely high that you don't. That's one reason why these young men and boys don't get much help. Out of sight, out of mind. But they need our prayers as much as anyone, and in many cases more than most. They continuously live seconds away from dying at the hands of a crazy John, some street thug, or some bad dope. Their world is heavily populated by demonic powers, that surround them with continual darkness. The odds are they've never known love, never been affirmed, never lived with anyone who demonstrated to them the true love of Christ. Why not ask God what He would have you do for these lost souls? Of course, pray for them. Today, God is reaching out to the least and the lost like never before, and male prostitutes are on the front lines of that divine intention. The producer of this TV program was one of them. Thank you for caring, and thank you for watching Pure Passion. It is our hope that each week, God will have showcased a new way for us to be His hands and feet on this earth, until that day when Jesus Christ returns for all who've loved and served Him. And He'll have His reward in His hands. Until then, I'm Jonathan Daugherty for Pure Passion.